In the early 1940s, amidst the tumult of the Second World War, a Royal Air Force base was built on the island of Ynys Môn in Wales. RAF Valley, as the base is now called, played a significant part in the war efforts. The fighter pilots stationed here were tasked with defending both the mainland and the Irish Sea from foreign assaults by the Axis powers. But this wasn't the first time in the island's long and storied past that it was at the epicenter of military activity, nor was it the first time that it needed to defend itself against a foreign threat. Because almost 2 millennia prior, Ynys Mon was subject to an invasion by the Roman Empire, a process that would take 2 attempts across more than a decade and would result in the destruction of one of the most mysterious religious orders to ever exist. The first Roman invasion of Ynys Mon, or Mona as they called it, began in the year 60 or 61. By then, a man named Suetonius Paulinus had been governor of Britain for around 2 years, and according to the Roman historian Tacitus, he'd enjoyed reasonable success in the province. But Suetonius desperately needed a win. His main political opponent had just reconquered the Kingdom of Armenia, and Suetonius wanted to prove that he was just as good of a general. And apparently, he decided the best way to do this was to invade Mona. I have my doubts whether these two are on the same level, but it does suggest that Mona was at least a critical military target. At that time, it was a densely populated, wooded island stronghold, home to a cult of Druids, which had been taking in rebels fleeing from the ongoing Roman campaigns across Britain. Since the year 47, the Romans had been dealing with significant resistance from Welsh tribes, especially from the Silures of South Wales and the Boudicca in the north. Suetonius' predecessor had launched a renewed attack on the Silures in the year 57, but had actually died of old age before he was able to finish the task. Suetonius was called in to replace him, and he most likely continued his work. We don't know for certain if he was motivated to invade Mona by a need to beat his political rivals, but it does seem likely that the island was being used as a centre of armed resistance during a time of great unrest. If the Romans wanted to quash the native resistance in Wales, then they would need to defeat the rebels on Mona. If you know much about the geography of northwest Wales, which I hope everyone does, then you will know that Ynys Mon is separated from the mainland by a body of water known as the Menai Strait. In the modern day, you can cross this strait via 2 bridges, but this wasn't possible for the Romans. Instead, they had to make a choice: wait 1,758 years for the first bridge to be built, or to try something else. Suetonius opted for the latter, building flat-bottomed boats that his infantry could use to cross without running aground on the underwater banks. Meanwhile, his cavalrymen were instructed to swim alongside their horses. And I personally don't like the idea of horses swimming. They're land creatures. On the shores of Mona, Suetonius' forces found the rebels waiting for them. Tacitus' description of this ragtag group is well known for its sensationalism, which for Tacitus is really saying something. In his words, "Standing shorefront was a various formation, thick with weapons and men. There were women running among them, fury-like in funeral dress, hair loose, brandishing torches, and druids around them, pouring forth curses, hands heavenward." The Roman forces were frozen with fear, leaving them vulnerable to their enemies. Suetonius saw this and bellowed over the chaos, "Don't be scared by a column of females and fanatics." The Romans rallied and advanced, and within the space of basically a single paragraph, Tacitus tells us how the Romans had arrived on Mona, conquered the rebels, and the Druids. With a sense of cruel irony, he then tells us that the Romans destroyed their foes with their own flames and torched the Druids' sacred groves. One of Tacitus' contemporaries, Pliny the Elder, made the claim that the only place where Druidism was still being practiced was Britain, as the Roman emperors had previously banned it in Gaul, meaning that Suetonius' fiery rampage surely dealt a colossal blow to the Druids. Ultimately, however, he got his victory. The conquest of this small island would surely make him look just as good as the man who conquered Armenia, and no Roman general would ever have to fight here ever again. And does anyone else smell burning? Sometimes when I'm bored and alone, I think about Suetonius. I sit on the floor of my windowless steel shipping container / editing studio, and I think about Suetonius. I think about him standing on the shores of Mona, the sand and the mud stained dark red. I think about him watching his men level the Druids' sacred groves, and I think about the messenger who had to tell him that disaster had struck on the mainland. While he'd been busy in North Wales, the Icenians of southeast England had staged a mass rebellion. This revolt is famous for the level of destruction which Boudicca, their queen, wrought on Roman-controlled territories. We know that the damage was severe because archaeologists in the modern day have managed to uncover evidence of fire debris amongst the remains of the Roman cities they leveled. One Roman historian even identified the Boudiccan revolt as being among the biggest catastrophes of Emperor Nero's reign, which is really saying something. A number of authors have attempted to connect the destruction of the Druids' sacred groves with the Boudiccan revolt. Some have even gone as far as to suggest that the Icenians might have rebelled against the Romans as a reaction to the invasion of Mona, and even that the Druids themselves might have been involved in the wider organisation of mass resistance against the Romans. It's understandable why this might have been suggested. Tacitus tells us that Suetonius invaded Mona because it was a rebel stronghold, yet on the island, his focus is on the Druids and the manic woman thronging around them. In the immediate aftermath of this scene, Suetonius then just finds out that the Icenians revolted, but this doesn't mean that the two events are related. The Roman sources also don't mention the invasion of Mona as an inciting factor for the revolt. Tacitus blames the rebellion on the brutalization of Boudicca, her daughters, and Icenian lands by the Romans. Meanwhile, the Roman historian Cassius Dio, writing a century later, placed the blame on the Romans' insistence on forcing the Britons to pay back heavy loans that they never wanted in the first place, a reaction that your average loan company probably wouldn't expect. There are other factors in play, but my point is that neither author mentions outrage at the destruction of a sacred site as a cause for rebellion, and neither suggests that the Druids had anything to do with Boudicca or the revolt. Surely if the Romans had suspected Druidic involvement, they would have included them in their accounts. Obviously these sources aren't perfect, but it's far more likely that, just as Tacitus claims, the rebels simply took the absence of the governor as an opportunity for revolt. In the end, Suetonius managed to defeat the Icenians, but he did so at the expense of the progress he had made elsewhere. In the aftermath of the revolt, the Roman campaigns in Wales ground to a halt, and Mona was forgotten. It wasn't until the year 73 or 74, when a new man, Julius Frontinus, was made governor of Britain, that there was any kind of renewed assault against the tribes of Wales. He focused his efforts on the south and, according to Tacitus, eventually managed to subdue the Silures. However, only 3 or 4 years later, Frontinus was replaced as governor by a man named Gnaeus Julius Agricola. Basically all of what we know about Agricola comes from Tacitus, and he just so happens to have been his son-in-law. And it's with Tacitus that we find our only account of the second invasion of Mona. He tells us that it was part of a much bigger campaign in North Wales. Just before Agricola's appointment to governor, the Ordovicius had revolted and almost destroyed an entire squadron of Roman cavalry stationed in their territory. The Romans now feared that this could inspire other Britons to also revolt. Agricola couldn't risk further insurrection in the province, so even though he'd arrived in Britain late in the campaigning season, he resolved to take decisive action, gathering a detachment of veterans from the legions and marching on North Wales. He led his men into battle against the Ordovicius and brought the tribe to its knees, yet he also didn't want to rest on his laurels. He had to cement his reputation as governor by also, finally, conquering Mona. Unlike Suetonius, Agricola didn't have time to build boats, so instead he chose a number of Britons from his forces because they were experienced swimmers and made these men take off all of their equipment and swim across the Menai Strait alongside their horses. The residents of Mona were expecting a naval assault, and so they were surprised by Agricola's bold new strategy of amphibious horse attack. The natives apparently quickly sued for peace, and Agricola was finally able to cement Roman control of the island. Another happy ending for Roman imperialism. We can all go to sleep tonight, content in the knowledge that after 13-ish years, the Romans had finally managed to conquer Britain's 7th largest island, bringing prestige and glory the likes of which they had never seen. Unless, if you're anything like me, you wake up in the early hours in a cold sweat, wondering, what happened to the Druids? If I were to tell you that there were Druids living on Mona the first time the Romans invaded, but not the second, you may think one of two things. 1. Did Suetonius wipe them all out during the first invasion? Or 2. Did they relocate? The situation is unfortunately a bit more complicated than that. Tacitus's first book was a text called the Agricola, part biography, part funeral oration, aimed at cementing the legacy of his late father-in-law, including his time as governor of Britain. However, he also includes a short history of the Roman campaigns here, giving us a timeline for over a century's worth of interactions between the Romans and the Britons, from Julius Caesar's invasion of Kent all the way through to the 9 governors who preceded Agricola. The issue with this is that there are no Druids anywhere in the Agricola. Tacitus goes through each of the Roman governors of Britain, and when he gets to Suetonius he just says, Suetonius Paulinus enjoyed 2 years of success, conquering tribes and establishing strong forts. Emboldened thereby to attack the island of Mona, he exposed himself to attack. He later credits him with putting down Boudicca's rebellion. He claims that if he hadn't acted so quickly, then the Romans might have lost the entire province for good. But nothing more is said about Mona. There's certainly no mention of the Druids here, and no other governor is said to have encountered them. Yet, a couple of decades later, in Tacitus's final known work, we get this second, much longer version of Suetonius' invasion. This time he includes this big confrontation between the Romans and the Druids, who have noticeably been absent from the rest of his description of Britain, and it's more than a little surreal. Tacitus compares the women of Mona to Furies, the winged goddesses of the underworld, who are known for inflicting awful punishments upon mortal men. These women are clearly supposed to pose a threat, but Tacitus never really tells us why they're here. We don't know if they're rebels, if they're part of the Druidic order, or if they're just women from the local area trying to work out what's going on. What truly terrifies the Roman soldiers, however, are the Druids. Tacitus draws us a haunting image, with the Druids' hands reaching up towards the heavens, hurling foreign curses at the approaching Roman army. My neighbours always get freaked out when I do that to them too. This is clearly supposed to be a victory of the civilizing Roman forces over the barbarism of an exotic foreign cult, with their strange gender roles and their foul beliefs. It's hard not to see the way this narrative plays out, lauding the victorious Romans and demonizing these strange barbarians. This has left many historians wondering then, whether Suetonius ever actually did encounter Druids on the shores of Mona, or if this is simply an expression of Roman jingoism, meant to rile up Tacitus's readers and grant them a vicarious victory over a distinctive foreign threat. Many historians have pointed to Tacitus's tendency to purposefully omit certain historical events, while other historians have also suggested that he was often more interested in narrative flair than historical accuracy. For now, it's just worth remembering that Tacitus wasn't just a historian, but also an influential politician. He claims he's writing with objectivity in his annals, but it's not really possible when he's actively part of the political elite that he's writing about. His perspective will always be warped by his own political ideology. Historians willing to give him the benefit of the doubt have argued that he wrote his account too close to the actual events to have completely fabricated them. They argue that it's not at all unlikely for the Druids to be here, as both Caesar and Pliny the Elder had already previously claimed that Druidism was practiced in Britain, and some have even argued that Agricola served his military apprenticeship under Suetonius, so he might have witnessed the invasion of Mona firsthand. On the other end of the spectrum, some historians find it hard to get past the clear barbarian stereotypes in Tacitus's description of these females and fanatics, as he puts it. After all, this is a story of the Romans coming face to face with an evil foreign cult made up of barbarians and triumphing. At the end of the day, we'll most likely never know for certain what occurred on the shores of Mona during Suetonius' invasion. We don't even know where Tacitus got his information from. We're not sure if his description of the Druids was based on someone's first-hand account or some kind of written report, or even if it was just pure fabrication. But for now, maybe we can speculate a little. In 1942, World War II was well underway, and the RAF Valley base on Ynys Môn was busier than ever, now being used as a stopping point for American aircraft which were crossing the Atlantic to help with the war effort. However, this meant that the runways at Valley needed to be expanded to accommodate the arrival of large American bombers, like the Liberator and Flying Fortress. During construction, workers were tasked with extracting peat from the coarse Ynys bog to be used to stabilize the sand dunes that the runways were being built on. However, they stumbled upon much more than just peat. Buried in the silt of the shores of Llyn, Cerrig, Bach, the workers uncovered metal. Ancient metal. The archaeologist Sir Cyril Fox was put in charge of excavating the area, and in total he uncovered a collection of over 180 iron and copper artifacts, including swords, spears, a dagger, part of a shield, a chariot, cauldrons, trumpets, and chains. Dating suggests that these items were all placed here between the middle of the 2nd century BC and the 1st century AD. The prevailing theory amongst historians is that Llyn Cerrig Bach was a sacred site, and that these items were left in the water as offerings. The majority of what's been uncovered by archaeologists has been well made and likely would have been expensive. The sheer variety of high status objects left over what seems to have been centuries suggests that this was a generationally important sacred site. The most interesting thing about the Llyn Cerrig Bach collection, however, is that none of the items can be dated to after the mid-1st century. In other words, whoever was leaving these deposits stopped doing so at around the time that the Romans arrived on the shores of Britain, or perhaps a little later, when the Roman forces landed on Ynys Môn. Deposited artifacts continue to be discovered in Llyn Cerrig Bach. As recently as April 2024, a team of archaeologists found a terret ring, which once would have been used to steady the reins of a Celtic chariot. Most likely, we will never uncover all of the treasures buried here, but perhaps that was the point. Perhaps 2 millennia ago, both the visitors and the inhabitants of Ynys Môn alike stood on the edges of the lake and watched their offerings sink down into the murky depths, expecting them to never be seen again. And much like these offerings, our own knowledge of these events has also sunken down into the murky waters, out of view, and will likely never be fully recovered. We don't know if the Romans really encountered a horde of curse-spewing Druids during their invasion of Mona, and we don't know if their legions were really terrified of a cabal of women dressed like furies from the underworld. Even Tacitus himself doesn't seem to know. Was he simply elaborating on an old account, or exaggerating his story with details he knew would shock or terrify his Roman audience? Why did he only include these details in his second version of the account? We don't know. There was certainly some form of ancient religion on Ynys Môn. People dedicated the offerings of Llyn Cerrig Bach to someone or something, and that stopped at around the time the Romans invaded. But we have no idea what this religion would have looked like, and maybe we never will. Did Suetonius really raise their sacred groves and overcome a horrifying army of these ancient curse-wielding priests? Everyone who knows for certain has been dead for nearly 2,000 years. But who knows? Maybe the answer is waiting for us out there, somewhere, buried in the soil, worked into the stone, or sat in the bottom of a bog, waiting to be discovered. Thank you for watching.